The purpose of this video is to review with you a DBQ example and to review with you some of the information that the scorers provided, and this is provided to us from the AP Central website for the American History Advanced Placement Exam. So again, what we're going to do with this PowerPoint today, or this presentation, is review the sample student essay. It got a score of a 6, and a discussion of document use in the essay and the incorporation of themes. Here's the actual question that the student was answering, and there is also a separate PowerPoint in which documents are reviewed and explanations are provided, and you're welcome to go back and review that if you haven't already in order to get a better understanding. But I do provide some of the documents that are used. I do have pictures of those as well on this presentation so you can see them. Here is a quick review of the skills on the DBQ that you should be able to display in order to get the score that you would like to get. And again, there is a separate PowerPoint that goes in more depth on these skills. So I'm going to move forward for purposes of time onto the example so we can talk more about it. But you can go back and review these skills in depth if you need to. Okay, on the left-hand side of the paper, you see the student example. And then on the right-hand side, you see this is the scoring that was done on this essay. And you see that the student was able to earn their 1 point from their thesis because their thesis is not a restatement of the question, that the thesis has basically identified causation. It says conservatism came from it came through economics and from a reaction against political excess and liberal social culture. The student also is going to earn the argument development point because the student is able to write chronologically, tracing causes and reactions in the essay, moving from Lyndon Baines Johnson's social programs and all the way up to the Carter administration and the Reagan presidency. And this cause and effect is going to help the student earn that 1 point. And then contextualization. The student in the introductory paragraph is going to achieve the contextualization point. You can see the quote there. During the New Deal and WW2, government capabilities and spending increased. So then the student is able to link this to the larger theme, and we talked about those APUSH themes of expansion of liberal social tendencies in later years as seen in social welfare and increasing executive power. So sometimes we get caught up in the idea that to contextualize we have to do a lot of work, but this student gives us a nice example of the ability to do that with a couple of sentences. And also, I need to go back to argument development for just a second because I failed to mention that the student was also very good at using evidence from the documents and also providing that outside information. And we're going to see examples of that as we go forward. And then the last part is that point earned for evidence beyond the documents. And in this particular part of the essay in paragraph 2, you can see some of that outside information listed: Medicare, Medicaid, and HUD as evidence of the rising national spending, and that's why people were seeking that economic conservatism. Okay, this is the next page, and the scorers stated that they would award document analysis for 2 points for the use of document content. It says documents 2 and 3 used on page 2 to support conservative opposition to social welfare programs. And also we'll go on and talk about document 1 in a minute on page 4. So you can see document 2 below there, the document by Milton Friedman, in which he criticizes government intervention and says that reforms and government intervention have basically had a negative influence. And so the student is able to show significance of the point of view of this author, and the student does this. If you look at the actual essay, you will see The student talks about the anger of economic conservatives on line 2, felt that the wrong way to solve the issues. Milton Friedman refuted the idea that welfare programs help solve the problems they aimed at. And he's a conservative, and he's reacting to how these programs are making people more dependent. And then the author then will go forward and begin to use the next source from Rockefeller, and we'll go forward there, and you'll see that source, document 3, and this is a source which is a letter from a person complaining that the welfare system and the liberal government policies are creating a lot of crime in the cities, and that she's a widow who lives alone and is getting tired of the crime and not being safe. And so the document here is used to, document 3 is used to show the point of view of people who are ready for some change and ready for those more conservative policies of the government and as regards economics. Then the essay will go on, and as we said, the student will again use document 1, and the scorers will award some credit here for using document 1, which is Barry Goldwater's Conscience of a Conservative, a passage from that, in which he talks about the government basically going beyond its power, and it's getting too big and too powerful and taking away people's liberties. And in the context of his statement, the author talks about the discussion of federal civil rights laws being passed. And so if we look over here at the essay, you'll see on down about line 4, you'll see civil rights movement passing civil rights acts of 57, 60, 64, installed a federal voting places in the states, prevent the states from using other means to stop African Americans voting. Barry Goldwater, he thought that this violated states' rights. So this person is putting that particular event, he puts his ideas, Barry Goldwater's ideas, in the context of actual events going on at the time, and shows how the government power was reaching beyond basically what the states were supposed to be able to do. So there's your context point, another one. Let's look for evidence beyond the documents on these 2 pages. I've highlighted in red or underlined in red some of that outside information, in which the writer goes on to talk about the next President Nixon, similar approaches to executive power. He tried to decrease welfare spending. I'm reading on the left here in the first full paragraph. He didn't eradicate it. A major scandal of his presidency, Watergate, made people distrust him. Nixon and LBJ both had imperial presidencies. The power of the government is increasing, especially in the executive Congress. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution is an example of an extension of power of the president. And then the War Powers Act is also mentioned. So this student's doing a really good job of providing that outside information. And also then the student brings in the women's rights movement to transition to talking about other issues going on at the same time that will relate to one of the other documents. And on this page, we're moving on into what we were just talking about, document 4. Document 4 is Jerry Falwell's part of his Listen America from 1980, where he talks about how young people are getting away from morality and how we've had a loss of ethics and the effect of that going on all over the United States. And so it says here that significance of Falwell's point of view in document 4 is explained. And they connect, and it's really cool. The student is able to connect Falwell's point of view to the issue of Roe versus Wade. And that is a great way to make that connection from the document to another historical event in the context of this time. And then documents 4 and 6 show opposition by evangelicals and women's groups to rising feminist movement. And you see document 6 down there is a letter from a homemaker. And she is talking about how she doesn't really support the feminist movement. She believes in women being homemakers and being more devoted to the family. And as I said before, the evidence for this rising feminist movement, such as discussion of ERA and Roe versus Wade, gives more context to what is actually going on in the United States, and lets the reader know that this writer does understand what types of belief systems and ideals, to speak of our bagpipe themes, are pushing people more towards this conservative view of life. All right, let's look at this page, which the writer uses document 5 to back the assertion conservatives are opposed to the weak handling of diplomacy by Jimmy Carter. You can see document 5 right there. That's the Republican platform. You can read through it, stop and pause. And then you can see the document 6 again, which is the letter from the homemaker who is in opposition to the feminist movement. And the author of the paper is very good with using Holt's point of view with reference to the conservative women, and to talk about how that the weak handling of Jimmy Carter as regards these events going on, and as far as the power of the United States at the time. And also you see, if we look at the essay on the left, some women felt that they did not need the economic liberation of the ERA. And Teddy Holt, she's one of the voices who is talking about that. She speaks about they're frustrated with the feminist movements, disdain for them, and their traditional gender roles. This is a clever a move by the writer to incorporate those bagpipe themes and talk about gender roles, and put the rise of conservative women in the context of this particular era of history. On this page, the author uses document 5 and talks about the Republican platform and the humiliation, as I was saying before, of the hostage crisis under the presidency of Jimmy Carter. And like I said, this particular source is document 5 source is put in context so that we can understand why these Republicans are after to become a more conservative government, to also to maintain the respect of the United States, also to have a stronger appearance, to become more of a respected world power. And so they are for world peace, but not at the expense of the United States losing respect around the world. So again, this puts that document in context as far as those particular issues. One of the things the author could have done is talk about the contradiction inherent in the conservative belief of fighting communism around the world and defense spending, and that really was not necessarily a conservative economic viewpoint, because in order to do that, you have to rely on taxpayers, you have to spend a lot of money on the defense industry, and in a way that's big government. So the writer could have brought that in at this point to contradict and show how these documents in context seem to show that contradiction in the Republican Party's belief system, which would also bring in those bagpipe themes. The last part of this essay, this is actually the last page in the conclusion, and it tells that the author was unable to provide any synthesis, and it does provide an explanation of how the synthesis could have been done. One of the ways that the author could have talked about synthesis is to connect the rise of the conservative movement in the 1980s to the Great Awakening, and that it was a conservative movement. Could have talked about the prohibition movement and the conservatism inherent in that movement, and to talk about how periodically in American history we have these returns to these traditional ideals that are connected to morality and religion. So in summation, I know this was a long presentation, and I appreciate your patience in listening and going through it. I thought I would return to the particular skills that we're trying to make sure that you can show the reader that you have. You have the skills, and all you need to do is get them down in a coherent method. Remember that thesis. It must be extended. It can't be a restatement of the question. It must answer the question, and it must be specific. It must have 2 to 3 parts. Then that argument must be followed all the way through the paper. It must be developed. It must show historical complexity. It must show relationships among the evidence, show which documents support each other, so show which documents contradict each other, show them in context, qualify those documents. And being able to do so, you'll show that you are reading into the documents and you're putting them in context and you understand those points of view. That's one of the things that they want to see you be able to do as a writer. Use at least 6 of the documents to develop your related arguments, a big part of your score. Source the documents. Explain the significance of those viewpoints. What is the purpose of that argument, those arguments being made? As in the case of Terry Holt, she has a purpose. She wants to get respect for the women who don't wish to go out and join the feminist movement. She wants to give validity to the homemakers. She wants to get those women who create the sacrifice or create the good families by staying at home. She wants them to be remembered alongside and in equality with the women who are going out and working. Put things in historical context. Talk about the Equal Rights Amendment movement in the context of Terry Holt's letter. You need to include what else is going on. What's the big picture? Why in the world was she motivated to write this letter in the first place? Those are some of the things that are going on. And talk about the audience. Who would even care about her argument? What kind of people would listen to her? And then contextualization. Explain those broader historical events, as we said, which is a very close skill connected to sourcing the documents. Bring in your themes as you do so, and think about how gender roles play into these particular arguments. As far as women working, in a time of war, it's more accepted that women go out and work. However, when the men return from war, women's roles changed. Those are some of the things that you should be thinking about as far as how gender roles change according to the economy. When women are needed to work, that role changes. And then when the war's over, the role changes again. Synthesis. Outside evidence. Be sure you bring in that outside evidence beyond that found in the documents, like this student did, talking about that rise of power of the government with the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, and also the government role in welfare, the extension of the Voting Rights Acts, which took over some of the state powers, those types of things. Synthesis. Be sure you make a connection and build upon those themes in American history to show how over time, we in America return to certain values again and again throughout history, and we are unique in that we can advocate for those changes and that our government is malleable. And that's something unique about us. So I hope this video helped you a little bit, and good luck with your test.